Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this press conference. The government has just announced a new suite of actions as it steps up its response to the rapidly changing global spread of COVID-19. The measures that we are taking include temporary restrictions on travel from Iran as a precaution, and a decision not to allow any exemptions for overseas students from China. We've also decided that we need a bolstered health staff presence at our international airports. Our pandemic plan is in place, and we continue to focus on keeping COVID-19 out of New Zealand. The enhanced travel restrictions and increased border presence add to our existing actions to limit the risk of COVID-19 entering the country. Obviously, the situation in Iran is concerning. There is ongoing spread of the disease there and a large degree of uncertainty about the scale of the outbreak and the ability to contain it. We continue to take our decisions based on the best medical and scientific advice, and that means that people will not be able to travel from Iran to New Zealand, and anyone who has been in Iran in the last 14 days will need to self-isolate. I would say that this is a sensible precaution, and note that many international airlines have already chosen not to operate out of Iran. So that means, as with the case with China, New Zealand permanent residents and citizens will be allowed to return home, but we will expect them to self-isolate for a period of 14 days. The restrictions will come into force immediately and will initially apply until midnight on the 3rd of March. They'll be reviewed every 48 hours, which is the same approach being taken to the China travel restrictions that have been in place since the 3rd of February. I will hand over to the Director General of Health to speak to the three measures that we're taking, and we'll take questions thereafter. Before I do that, I would just note that in terms of the exemptions for tertiary students, the strong advice we've had from health professionals and medical experts is that we should not lift that ban at this stage. A precautionary health-based approach is to keep in place a ban on all students who are not permanent residents or citizens from New Zealand, the same as we have in place for other people coming back to New Zealand. And in terms of the spread of COVID-19, we know now that it's in over 40 countries. It is a very rapidly evolving situation, and we as a government are determined to act nimbly in the interests of our citizens and the interests of public health. So that's also why we're scaling up our activities in airports, because we want to make sure that anyone returning to New Zealand can have access to information should they develop any concerns about their own health. So I'll hand over to the Director General and we'll answer any questions. Thank you. I'll come over here.
Well, kia ora koutou. I just want to build on what the Minister has said. I want to start, as I always do, by reiterating we have no confirmed cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand. We have testing underway on a suspected case, and we are expecting the final results of that testing later this afternoon, and we will update you and the New Zealand public once we have those results. To date, over 130 tests have been completed, all negative so far, and there are tests underway, further 5 tests underway, as I say. One of those is in someone who fits the suspected case definition. The measures that the Minister has outlined, particularly around the border, but also the decision around a potential exemption for tertiary students or students from China, Based on the best expert advice, we continue to convene our technical advisory group each week, and more frequently by telephone if we need to. So, as you will be aware, and as mentioned by the Minister yesterday, that technical advisory group confirmed that we should continue to treat China as a Category 1 country, or this is the way they've suggested we treat China. And in that instance, the Category 1 country includes border restrictions around the travel from China, and we have provided advice to ministers that that should also be extended, as the Minister said, to include Iran. And there are good reasons for that. Not just the increasing number of cases in Iran, but our concerns around the quality of the information that we can get from there, and also our sense that the health care and public health system there has got a greater problem in coping with what seems to be quite a widespread outbreak in that country. We also, on the advice of the Technical Advisory Group, did introduce the second category, so Category 2 countries, in particular around the case definition. So if people are presenting to a health professional with symptoms that are consistent with COVID-19 and they have a history of travel to those countries, then we're suggesting they should be considered as possible cases of COVID-19, and if appropriate, testing undertaken. And as you will be aware, those countries or jurisdictions include Hong Kong, Iran, Italy, Japan, Republic of Korea, Singapore, and Thailand, noting that we've also just advised that Iran is treated now as a Category 1 country. So that means anyone who has been in those countries in the last 14 days who presents with fever, cough or shortness of breath should first of all call Healthline to seek advice, and we have that dedicated COVID-19 number. We know that the WHO hasn't yet declared a pandemic. However, right from the start of our response to COVID-19, we have been basing our actions and our planning on our pandemic plan. Whilst that plan is to cover influenza, it is extremely relevant to this particular situation, and we have just been adapting that plan. That is a plan that incorporates actions across the health system, but also across government. And later this afternoon, we have another meeting of the ODESC committee, the cross-government committee of officials, to look at the state of our planning across government as if we are gearing up for a manage it type situation, as we would if this was a pandemic. So our preparation and planning continues to progress apace. Finally, a public awareness campaign is starting today, and New Zealanders will hear messages coming out around what they can do and should be doing to protect themselves and their family and whānau, and of course the wider community. And the key messages there are around good hygiene, regular hand washing, and good cough and sneeze etiquette, the sort of messages we have been emphasising right from the start. So the ads will be playing on radio stations across New Zealand this weekend, and there will be a presence in social media rolling out as well, with a focus on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you, and we're now open to questions.
I'm talking more about Category 2 cases.
Okay.
And the suspected case,
Yes.
and where they're from and what city they're in.
Yes, so this is someone who has travelled to New Zealand earlier in the week and has come from Iran, and they are currently being looked after in Auckland at Auckland City Hospital.
How come people from the Category 2 destinations aren't having to self-isolate?
So this is based on the epidemiology and the nature of the outbreak in those countries. And in particular, if we think about countries like South Korea and Japan and what's happening in northern Italy, the measures that those countries have put in place to help control the outbreak in those countries. So the advice to those people is that they should be aware if they develop symptoms and what to do. Now, you'll recall right from since the start of our health staff being at the airports, we've emphasised the main purpose of them being there is to ensure that people know what to do if they become unwell. And this has been still the focus of our presence there to meet flights from China. It is also something we're thinking about now. As the number of countries increases, actually it becomes more important that everybody arriving in New Zealand gets that information. There has already been signage there for some time, and we'll be looking to increase our presence there so that everybody is able to access information about what to do if they develop symptoms.
Is New Zealand acting fast enough compared to Australia?
Well, you'll have heard me say before, we've been working very closely with Australia, and I know the Minister's regularly in contact with his counterpart, and the Prime Minister, of course, is in Australia at the moment, and I know this has been one of the topics for discussion there. I think New Zealand is moving apace, and if you think about the point we're at now, we're 4 weeks since Australia had its first case. We still haven't had a case to date, and that's, I think, a reflection of the planning and preparation we have put in.
Can you tell us what the extra staff at the airport are actually going to be doing?
Well, what I would say is that as we move into this next sort of phase where an increasing number of countries have cases, and they're not necessarily countries that have direct flights to New Zealand, it becomes less important for public health staff to be there. Rather, we want them to be doing what they might need to be doing, which is contact tracing if or when we get cases. So these will be health staff who will probably be from the District Health Board or brought in to make sure there is a much more continuous presence there to ensure everybody coming in has access to information.
How many people?
It's not going to be like compulsory checking or anything like that.
No, as I say, right from the start, the purpose of our health presence at the airport has been ensuring that people get information rather than and anyone who is unwell, which is a very regular situation at the airport. There is always someone at the airport, even when we don't have a COVID-19 outbreak, for unwell passengers to be checked and seen and get medical advice.
Why has Iran moved into the Category 1 tier and not other countries like Italy and South Korea?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this has already been said, but probably to clarify, the information coming out of Iran appears to be out of step with what's coming out of other countries in terms of the death rate per incidence, and also the advice that we receive from medical and health experts around the preparedness of their own health system. So we know that they are moving to put in their own checks at the border. We know that a number of airlines have suspended their flights to Iran. And because of that uncertainty, we think the precautionary approach suggests that we should be taking that step there. Whereas in other countries with more well-developed health systems who clearly have a grip of what's happening, we have more confidence in their response. But we're going to continue to review that.
What has the Iranian government told you about that step? Have you told them about
look, that Foreign Affairs handles that side of things, so I don't have any comment to offer on that.
How many people have been coming from Iran each week?
We know that each day there's about 5 or 6 people. It's actually a relatively small number of people that come from Iran, but nonetheless, we think it's a wise step to take given the uncertainty in that area.
Have you made contact with those people?
Those people will not be allowed to board planes.
The ones that are already here? The
ones that are already here will be expected to self-isolate, and that will be followed up. People will be registered at the border. Those who've registered, those others who haven't, from here on in, New Zealand citizens coming in will be receiving that advice. Those that haven't, of course, we'll ask them to take necessary precautions.
And the suspected case, has that person been in contact with someone that does have COVID-19, or have they just been in Iran?
As best I'm aware, we're not aware that they're in touch with a confirmed case, but we think it's important to take precautions where people present with things that could align with COVID-19. Does the Director General, do you have any more technical information than that? No.
So Australia are now operating as though it is a pandemic over there before the World Health Organization declared it. Will we do that? Will we look at doing that here?
Look, I think the steps we've taken, particularly in terms of extending the border restrictions, in terms of not making any exemption for students. I noticed that Australia appear to be tightening their stance on students coming in than they'd previously done, is very much in step with Australia, and you wouldn't be surprised about that. We'll make our own independent assessments, but our health officials are talking with their Australian counterparts all the time, sharing information, sharing what we're learning from the science. So we're working very closely with our Australian counterparts.
Scott Morrison says there's every indication that this will become a global pandemic. Would you agree with that?
Look, I'll allow a health expert to speak directly to that.
So actually earlier this week, I referred to what had happened over the weekend, particularly that escalating number of cases in Iran, as well as the situation in northern Italy. We're now in a situation where it may not be called a pandemic, but effectively we are approaching a declaration of a pandemic at some point. I'm not the first person to have said that. And all that means is that we continue to scale up our planning as if we are moving from the keep it out to the stomp it out and manage it phase. But there's no bright line between these phases. They do overlap. So we're very ready with the manage it phase, with the stomp it out phase, which is the contact tracing and try and contain any further spread. And we're gearing up further our planning around a manage it phase as if it was declared a pandemic. The declaration of a pandemic, a bit like the declaration of a public health event of international concern some weeks ago, didn't change our approach per se, but they clearly show that then there is an international level of concern, and they mobilise WHO and other resources to help particularly countries with poorer health systems or less developed health systems.
Two more questions, folks.
Do you have any more specifics on the suspected case of whereabouts in Iran they're from, or how long they've been in New Zealand, family members that they might be in contact with who are also, are they being tested as well?
So I'm sorry, I don't have any further detail, which may reflect the fact that I've been on leave for the last 2 days. But if this is a confirmed case, we will tell it as much information as we can, but respecting, of course, the privacy of for that individual and their family.
So if a pandemic is declared, what are the next steps from here after for this step forward? What's next? What would we do?
We would continue to do what we're doing, and that is that we have a very well-developed plan, a pandemic plan on which we're basing our COVID-19 response, and we will continue to develop up our cross-government actions, remembering that in addition to those in the health system, they go right across welfare, the economy, tourism, all sectors, the private sector and so on. And you'll have heard others like the Minister of Finance talking about what is happening in terms of responding to the impact on the economy. So that's all part of the pandemic planning. No area of government, nor indeed any area of society, will be outside of that planning.
So just to clarify, our pandemic plan is in place.
Yes.
So it's being adapted as we go.
That's correct. It's an excellent and very detailed framework for the sorts of actions that we need to undertake in each phase, and it's been tested. We've trialled that, done a proper cross-government trial of it in 2018. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.